Iawn, wel, croeso I chi gyd, croeso cynnes iawn, dwi'n eisiau dweud cynnes, oes e? Mae hi yn gynnes. Wel, I ni gwybod pam ni yma, Rhodri ydw i, Rhodri Llwyd Morgan, dwi'n brifweithredwr yma yn y Llyfrgell Genedlaethol, ac i ni yma I ddathlu bywyd a gwaith Margaret Jones a nodi cyhoeddi llyfr newydd Peter Stevenson a'r rhodd hael gan y teulu o ryw 200 o weithiau ychwanegol gan Margaret tuag at gasgliadau'r Llyfrgell. So very warm, and I don't need to say that, do I, on an afternoon like this, but a very warm welcome to everybody. So my name is Rhodri Llwyd Morgan. I'm Chief Executive here at the National Library of Wales, and we're here to celebrate the life and work of Margaret Jones and the publication of Peter Stevenson's new book entitled Margaret Jones and the Art of Visual Storytelling, and to express our gratitude as well to Margaret's family for their very generous donation of some 200 additional works by Margaret to the national collections held here at the library. I ni'n recordio, a mi fydd hynny ar YouTube yn fuan. We are recording, and that will be on YouTube soon. We're also taking photographs, and we'll be using those in social media and in further publications. So if you don't want to feature in those photographs, please let us know. And I'm going to be introducing the speakers tonight, and at the end there'll be a chance to have a closer look at a range of works from the collections and an opportunity to buy Peter's new book and other items from the shop there with Eiri in command. And they're all relevant, I think, to Margaret's work as well. But I was thinking about the importance and the contribution of visual storytelling, because just this week we've had the beginning of a new exhibition in the Hengwrt Gallery upstairs, which is the reunion Bibles from 1538 or 1539, which were the personal possessions of King Henry VIII and his chief advisor Thomas Cromwell. So very interesting, very lavish copies of very early English Bibles. And one of them is usually living at Cambridge University Library. And to have them here together for the first time in centuries is a rare treat. But have a look at them because they are incredibly artful and incredibly beautiful volumes. The artists, I think, were at the top of their game. They were working in Paris with the publication, the printing of this work. But they also were doing a little bit of photoshopping in those days to touch up, to adapt the different publications to suit the two owners and the rather different interests and politics. And so the story behind the publications is in that exhibition and is well worth a look. So, on to our speakers tonight. And first of all, it's my pleasure to welcome my colleague, Mae'n bleser I wahodd fy nghydweithiwr yma yn y Llyfrgell, Morfydd Befan Llwyfan. It's a pleasure to invite Morfydd to speak first. Morfydd is the Curator of Art here at the National Library. Morfydd.
Diolch yn fawr, Rhodri. I won't keep you for too long because I know we're all looking forward to hearing tonight's speakers. I'd just like to take you quickly back to 2019 when I invited Peter Stevenson to give a talk on Margaret Jones's work here at the National Library's Drome Auditorium to celebrate her 100th birthday. Margaret and her family were all present for the event, and the library's auditorium, the same as tonight, was filled to the brim with admirers of Margaret's work. Several of her pieces from the library's collections were on display, and a memory which will stay with me forever was seeing Margaret reconnect with these works after she had not seen them for many years. And Peter gave a heartfelt tribute to the artist, and Peter's told me that it was his research for that talk which led him to writing this wonderful book on the artist. And the National Library had always had a close relationship with Margaret Jones. In 2000, the library commissioned the artist to illustrate a book written by Rhiannon Evans and a map to commemorate the 600th anniversary of Owain Glyndwr's reign. And the library collected the artist's works throughout her career. And recently, as Toddy said, we were tremendously grateful to Margaret's family for donating her remaining 200 works to our collections. And I'd just like to take the opportunity again to thank them for their generosity. And the works now held at the library span the entirety of the artist's career, from her iconic Mabinogi illustrations, which we all know from the 80s, to her works based on the Tale of Taliesin in the 90s, her Llywelyn Llyw works in the 2000s, to name only a few. And also housed here are works she created in collaboration with Cricket magazine, the American magazine for children, between 1997 and 2004, and also works which were never published, which are really interesting, such as her 12 drawings based on David ap Gwilym's poetry for Gregornog Press in 1992. And many of the works from our collections can be viewed just over here for you tonight. And after such a prolific and successful career, it is wonderful and a fitting tribute to the artist that her works are now treasured at the library for future generations to enjoy and research. And I'd now just like to hand over to Peter Stevenson to begin this evening's celebrations of Margaret's distinguished career as one of Wales' foremost illustrators. Diolch yn fawr, a diolch Peter.
Diolch I ti, Morfydd. Diolch yn fawr iawn. So now, I'd like to invite to the stage the author of the new book, as well as a prolific illustrator in his own right. Please welcome Peter Stevenson. Peter.
Wel, diolch yn fawr. Diolch Rodri, Morfydd. Croeso bawb. Welcome, everybody. I hope you're going to learn a few things about Margaret, which maybe you may not have known before. For a start, most people knew her as Peggy. Shortened version of Margaret. So if you hear me switching between Margaret and Peggy, I am talking about exactly the same person. Now, as Morfydd has already said, we celebrated Margaret here 5 years ago, in 2019, to celebrate about a month before her 100th birthday. And her sight was failing at that point. She'd stopped painting a few years before. So to compensate, she gently touched the artwork on the stage in the drum to remind herself of the images she had painted many years before. And you can see that in the lower picture. There she is with Morfydd caressing the artwork. She did this many times when she couldn't see. She felt the books, she felt the artwork. At the conclusion, she took really little persuasion to stand up and take the applause. And people were so thrilled that she was there. But it was afterwards when it all really started. She settled down in Pendinas, in the cafe, at a table with her family around her, and people sat around and people stood in a line all the way around the table. And she held court. She told all her favourite stories, how she was the first and only woman at her theological college, how she temporarily lost her Christian faith later in life, thanks to the idea that everything was paradox, and how her husband, Basil, coped by pretending it wasn't really happening. 2 hours later, we'd been transported into Margaret's extraordinary world of story, myth, and art, leaving little doubt that she is far more than an illustrator of folk tales. She is the painter of Welsh dreams. Now, she lived right here in and around Aberystwyth for 70 years. First in Tre Taliesin, then on the Buarth, then Cafodd Bangor, and latterly in the old school, just 5 minutes walk away from where we're sitting now, where she was still reciting epic verse from the great myths into her 11th decade, without a fault in her memory. She loved telling tales from her imagination, especially if visitors brought her chocolates. I've got to say, most illustrators I know, including me, are chocoholics. One morning in 1978, Margaret was standing on her doorstep on the Buarth, reading a letter from the Arts Council of Wales, asking if she would possibly be interested in illustrating a full-colour edition of the 4 branches of the Mabinogi. Well, of course she was. She'd been painting scenes from Welsh mythology and folklore for exhibitions for a decade, and she was aware that generations had grown up with these culturally iconic stories, the tales of the tribe. Margaret was 60. She'd already raised 6 children, and she never had illustrated a book before. And she knew she could shatter dreams with a single brushstroke. She needn't have worried. 40 years later, Margaret's paintings have woven themselves into our dreams and our memories. Her books are in every school and library. Her illustrations have been exhibited across the country. They decorate countless greetings cards, you can see some in there, prints and posters, and through her eyes, we, as a country, see Branwen and her starling, Blodeuwedd, the woman of flowers, the Pair Dardeni, and Gwydion, the Machiavellian magician, as well as the countless characters in Welsh folk culture. She tells their stories through the language of illustration. This is visual storytelling. Margaret was born in December 1918 into a Methodist family in Bromley, Kent, where the golden age of illustration was still at its peak. The old printing method of sending a drawing to an engraver to carve a wood or metal plate that would be inked and printed had been succeeded by photogravure. Now the tones and textures of watercolour, like this illustration from her unpublished version of the White Goddess, could be reproduced photographically for the very first time. Books now became highly exquisite art objects. Margaret, like many young women at the time, grew up inspired by the watercolours and line drawings of golden illustrators, like her hero, Arthur Rackham, who was at the height of his powers when Peggy was just a little girl. And this, on the left, is her own copy of A Midsummer Night's Dream. It's a 1977 copy, which just happened to be the moment when she was about to become a professional illustrator. Rackham was exploring that boundary between the sentimental and the grotesque, and how radical and exciting was that to young Peggy. Her dark sense of humour. She drew on wallpaper in the family home. She carved a face into the wooden mantel shelf, and she sketched a man slipping on a banana skin, which her teacher, Miss Lowe, was so impressed with, she showed it to the whole class. Every day she drew. Nothing could stop her. Throughout her schooling at Southport, college in Birmingham, to Bangor, where her father had taken a job as a religious educator. During World War II, Margaret became a nurse, then went on to be onto a teacher training course where her life changed. She met a young Welsh student from the Rhondda, Basil Jones, who actually studied right here in Aberystwyth. After a whirlwind romance, they married. Shortly after, Basil was sent to India to teach at a mission in Mizoram. Peggy saved up, and a few months later, she followed. They settled into the Mizo Hills. Gareth, who's here in the audience, was born in, I'm sorry, I have to say, 1945, is that right, Gareth? It's still alive and still doing so well. Thank you, Gareth. Followed by Peter and Elaine, who's also here, until independence and partition forced a return to Wales. In 1954, Basil accepted a job here at Aberystwyth University. They travelled down on the bus, and passing through Tre Taliesin, through the stories of the submerged land of Cantra Gwaelod, the wise old toad of Cwrs Fochno, the Welsh utopia of Rhys Ddyfn, Margaret decided this was where she would raise her growing family. And that's where Malcolm, Chris, and Mark were born. She never stopped drawing. She made puppet shows of her favourite stories. You can see one of the very few surviving photographs of Hansel and Gretel, which was a puppet show that she took round all the schools here in North Ceredigion. She made a doll's house with an egg cup for a toilet and cut out card figures like the pirate bear. All her work at this time was for the children, her own and for the school children. Early painting of Noah's Ark, and an alphabet book, which I think she was planning on having published, but it never was. She said she could never keep her fingers still. And when you have children, well, they're very convenient models. They don't cost a great deal. They don't often keep still. So here we are, early drawings from the late 1960s of Chris and Mark, who is sat here and you're going to hear from later on. So you can now remember him as a little child. She made extraordinary things, more cut-out figures for the children to play with. She even made her own set of happy families. And I think many of these were based on people she knew. Dolls. She adored dolls. In the early 70s, in just over 1 year, she made 45 dolls out of coat hangers, feathers, and plastic wood, with ping-pong balls for heads, dyed animal wool for hair, all dressed in historically accurate costumes from the last 600 years. Again, she used them to teach in schools, in this case particularly Plas Crug. On the left there is, as far as I'm aware, her earliest landscape painting, Ty Lysiau, of which some of you here will know a little bit more than me. This was in Mizoram. It was the house next door, and they kept pigs underneath the house. The picture on the other side won a competition in 1975. She'd been studying with Howell Harris's art classes and exhibiting with the Ceredigion Art Society. This was her training. She never went to art college. But she was painting landscapes. Basil took her out in the car and he left her with paints and easels and then collected her later on. She was fine being out there in the landscape on her own, drawing, singing. She often drew on both sides of the paper to economise. They weren't all that well off. And she frequently doodled in the margins of the paper. You might see a few of those later. And then she and Baz framed the pictures themselves and showed them with the Art Society. These are the earliest Mabinogi paintings so far that have turned up. Rhiannon from 1970, Arawn from 1969, and Blodeuwedd, which I think is round about 1970. And these came about through commissions, and I think there might be one or two people here who made those commissions, knowing her fascination with mythology and her skills as a landscape painter. So these came out of people asking her to do something. And already at that stage, she was producing work of this incredible quality. Even in these early pictures, she could paint movement. This is something that people don't always do when they start painting. Figures look static. Margaret was painting movement from a very, very early age. And these paintings took her quite literally down winding staircases and torchlit corridors. At this time, she was developing her style, her working methodology. She would produce many versions of the same idea, and there are at least 7 copies of dylanwadu, of the Borhant. These are all, I think, unpublished ones, some in private hands, some in the National Library here. And of course, the famous one appeared in the Book of the Mabinogi, which is where we come to next. This is what she's most famous for. Her dreams came true. And it was all thanks, first of all, to an exhibition of paintings in the church on Bath Street where she went, which led to another in Aberystwyth Arts Centre in 1979. That in turn led to her first book commission from Cyngor Celfyddydau Cymru to illustrate the Mabinogi, the epic stories she had so long wanted to illustrate. And she knew the role of an illustrator is to complement the text, not replicate it. You don't repeat. Another hero, Maurice Sendak, said in an interview in 1970, "There is nothing so dull as translating books that are beautifully written into a picture. The author has already done that, so you, as an illustrator, must contribute something else. Adorn the word, go inside the word, or go around the word, but extend it in some marvellous way." For the overall feel of the book, she returned to her childhood hero. Like Rackham, Margaret laid down washes of yellow ochre, Prussian blue, or vermilion, very common with illustrators, because it mutes the colours she painted over the wash. Although the publisher of the Mabinogi wrote back to her demanding brighter primary colours, which was kind of the fashion of the day in the 1970s and 80s. Margaret, however, loved Rackham's dark boundaries, and she replied to the Arts Council, "Arthur Rackham would never have had this trouble." There was a compromise of sorts. If you look at the book, there are 4 introductory paintings to each branch, and they're brighter. That was her compromise. She painted 4 brighter pictures. She painted her own landscape as backgrounds. She was living in Capel Bangor at the time, and many of the backgrounds are from the Rheidol Valley, including on the right-hand side there, the waterfall coming down is one of the tributaries of the Rheidol. So the Mabinogi was not set in the North Wales or South Wales. It was set right here in North Ceredigion. She was really skilled at balancing reality and imagination. She saw the two as 2 complementary aspects of the same thing. You can see here in the drawing of Llay at the bottom, she captures both the mythological transformation and the growing pains of a young man in the midst of a rite of passage. Arvo ben byd bont, the illustration at the top, shows the metaphor of the building of bridges in times of conflict and division, as Bran's soldiers cross over his back over the river to invade Ireland. How we need some of that bridge building at this time. Margaret finished her paintings for the Mabinogi in 1982, and it was published 2 years later, translated into English by the poet and folktale writer Kevin Crossley Holland, and published by Victor Gollancz in London. It was translated into Scots Gaelic and Danish, very rare co-productions for Welsh publishing. The artwork travelled around galleries, bridges were built, Welsh mythology found a voice in the wider world. It was launched at the 1984 Eisteddfod, where Gwyn, Thomas and Margaret met for the first time. Something people hardly believe, illustrators and writers often don't meet. You will all know this. The map of the Mabinogi, her most iconic painting. Maps were seen as mirrors into the past. Think of Snow White's stepmother, Alice through the looking glass. And folk tales here in Wales are intricately connected to the Welsh landscape. So it was little surprise when the Arts Council commissioned her to produce the map of the Mabinogion, which has adorned many a bedroom wall, including mine and my son's. The National Library has recently acquired an astonishing piece of artwork, the original pencil drawing of the map. It's the same size as the map, it's enormous, it's very fragile. For anybody interested, Morvid will unwrap a little part of it over there after we finish the talk. But there it is on the right-hand side. That's the pencil drawing, same size as the map, detail exactly the same as the map. But it shows her methodology, because what she was doing, you can see there, it's a collage. She was drawing on a smaller scale, cutting them out and then sticking them on the map. It was also a brilliant idea, because if she made a mistake, she could just draw it again and just glue it onto the map. It's outstanding, but you can also see there these subtle changes, like the position of the fish. The salmon has slightly moved. She's added the tree and the castle down in the bottom right-hand corner. Her methodology was incredible and common to so many illustrators, but what's astonishing is the detail she put into her pencil drawings. After the publication of the Mabinogi, the commissions dried up. She had no work, or at least no paid work. That didn't stop her, though. She was continually drawing. And these are from a calendar which she'd been asked to do for my Gwasgreganog of the poems of David ap Gwilym. Unfortunately, it was never published, but it is here in the National Library. These are from Robert Graves' book, The White Goddess, and as far as I'm aware, these have never been seen before. There's a set of 7 of them. They're remarkable, remarkable paintings. Those of you who know the Mabinogi can see the parallel between the character in the bottom picture and wedi'i in the Mabinogi. She was reusing ideas. It's what illustrators do. What she was doing at this point, without commissions, she was drawing the passing of time. This is Saturn, and if you can see closely enough, you see people walking around the rings, growing older and older, and then falling off. The ticking clock, the mechanisms in the background. Brilliant idea. When time was passing, why not paint the passing of time? I think I might have skipped past the picture. Hang on. Yes, I have. Apologies. Oh, what's going on? Yeah, there we are. Sorry, not leapt ahead. So she was painting the passage of time. The top picture is called Night. And again, you get this strong sense of the disappearance of the day and the arrival of the night. She did quite a few pictures where she would do a landscape and then somehow paint these extraordinary figures over the top, very pale, almost in white outline. And the bottom picture is the winter solstice. Again, this passion for time. This is the kingdom under the lake. Here, the time is the other world. And I think Arona, you're here, aren't you? Who lent this picture. I can't see where you are. There you are. Got you. Yeah, so this was kindly lent by Arona, who's over in the back there, who, I think you bought this in Ceredigion Museum? Ah, okay, yeah, and then it passed down to you. So many of Margaret's paintings are in private collection. She sold them through exhibitions, many she gave away. The Kingdom Under the Lake, 1984. The importance of this also is we have so many folk tales about the world under the water, as if these other worlds, the sky, the water, the land we can't see, there's no difference between them. They're all exactly the same. The other drawing is the Avanc from the Conwy estuary. She was also creating her own books. She had no commission, so why not make the books anyway? That's what illustrators do. This is a pramful of goblins, which is a great little story that she wrote herself. Well, you can see these weird little characters. And it all came from an image she had from her childhood when she was a little girl, little Peggy, and she saw a little girl pushing a pram round with a bunch of what she described as really weird dolls. And that became, later in life, the story of the pramful of goblins, never published. Nor was this, The Lady of the Fountain. And you kind of wonder why no Welsh publisher would publish this iconic Welsh story, one of Peggy's favourites. The King of the Golden River, John Ruskin, another real favourite story of hers. She produced many illustrations for this. Basil, her husband, rewrote the story for her. Again, unpublished. She was gaining a reputation as a cartographic illustrator. She illustrated at the millennium, as has already been referred to, the map of Owen Glyndŵr, which is here in the library, and you can actually see it over there. Robin Gwyndaf commissioned her to do a map of all the folk tales that he had been gathered while he was travelling around the country in the employ of St. Fagan's Folk Museum. That's an extraordinary and unique map. More maps. The one on the left. I know it looks like Wales. It's actually Narnia, C.S. Lewis. It has a kind of feel of Cardigan Bay in there, but I rather think that might have been intentional. That was from the BBC TV programme many years ago. The other one is The Buried Treasures of the British Isles. She was painting many maps. Then, finally, after nearly 4 years' wait, another commission. At last. And it was the one she had always wanted. Her favourite story, Culhwch ac Olwen. The illustration on the left there, it's not a rough drawing, that's just an illustration she did. The one in the middle is the one from the book. She had a ball doing this book, but if you look at it closely, you'll find there's only half the number of colour pictures as there are in the Mabinogi. But you would hardly know, because she was a mistress of black line, monochrome illustration. She could make you think you were looking at a colour picture, and you weren't. This picture you can also see over there. It's enormous. It's Culhwch ac Olwen, with the court at the top and the people making all the food down below. I haven't yet found out why she did this. So if anybody does know, I would love to find out. We think it was for a poster, but there's no printed copy turned up. So maybe it's yet another unpublished illustration. And again, you can see it over there. Then came Chwedl Taliesin. Now this was another real favourite story. It has a refreshing wry humour, which suited Margaret's natural wit perfectly. There's parody in these epic tales, and it becomes clear only really when you hear a tall tale teller, of which we have many here in West Wales. When you hear one of them tell the story, they're funny, they're hilarious, they big up the humour. So when Margaret drew Ceridwen, she exaggerated her. It's almost like looking at a cartoon book. It's one of my favourites. I love the fact that she was so passionate about the story. And of course, she'd lived in Tre Taliesin, where part of the story takes place. Oh, hold on. I'm jumping the gun here. Thank you, Diolch. Right. Commissions followed: Arthur, Madog, Dewi Sant, David ap Gwilym, a who's who of the folkloric figures of Wales. She won, shared the Tyr Nog Award in 1989, 1993, 2000 and 2003. She then worked with Margaret Isaac of Apex Press on Twm Sion Cati, the Troch Troeth, and in 2004, aged 86, yet another dream came true. She published her first book as writer and illustrator. Anybody knows us illustrators, we think we can do just as well as writers, and Margaret knew she could. And that was the beginning of the story of the changeling child, Nat, who leaves the fairy world for the industrial valleys. And I think Mark might tell you a little more about that later on. Just a couple of favourites of mine. This goes back to her India days, but it was published much later. She used all her memories of life in India to illustrate Hindu tales by the storyteller Debjani Chatterjee. And this actually is one of my favourites, O Bedwar Ban Europe, from the Four Corners of Europe, which was a set of 7 books written in 7 minority European languages. So each book is in a different language, same illustrations. Actually, I think I can... I've got a copy with me. There it is. And the illustrations in it are some of my real favourites. So you've got a couple of them up there. One of the languages was Roma, the Welsh Romany people, the travelling people, to publish a book in a travelling language. Extraordinary. There was the Frisian language is in there. Quite utterly remarkable. Then she began working for Cricket magazine. That is not the game. Cricket was a magazine set up in the United States by Twm Sion Cati, who was another great fairy tale illustrator. And the idea was to produce a magazine full of high-quality illustrations where the illustrator got to write the stories. It was pure heaven for Margaret. One of the first ones she wrote was one of her favourite Indian stories, Rama and Sita. Again, many of these pictures now in the National Library here. Then, in 2008, she collaborated once again with Robin Gwyndaf on Llyfrgell Iowan, published by Robin himself in 2008. Now, my feeling is this may yet be seen as her masterpiece, for the stories in the Revelation of John were very personal to both Margaret and Robin. This dystopian vision allowed her to paint the kind of images that were not suitable for her children's book, such as that one. Margaret now takes her place alongside her hero, Arthur Rackham, as well as the great illustrators like Virginia Sterrett, John Bauer, Kay Nielsen, Tove Jansson, Lotte Reiniger. You could go on forever. And how fitting that the myths of the women of Wales, Blodeuwedd, Branwen, Arianrhod, Rhiannon, Goewin, are defined by yet another inspiring woman. As Sioned Davies goes on to say, at the end of this quote on the screen there, Margaret Jones's illustrations have become part of the story of the Mabinogian, and like the tales themselves, a treasured part of our heritage. And that tradition continues. Margaret wrote her autobiography in 2007, a book which, one evening, she confided to me, would have been twice as long if only she could have spoken her real mind. I'll leave that one to you. And again, the tradition continues through her granddaughter, Seren Morgan Jones, one of the finest artists we have here in Wales now, whose work is also being collected by the National Library. Margaret's understandable nervousness in those early days has been turned on its head. Her books have inspired new generations of illustrators like Valériane Leblond, who you're going to hear from in a moment, who are in turn reimagining the old tales. These stories from the past, told in the present about the future. Margaret is our eyes into Welsh mythology. She was once interviewed by an art student who had to do a painting in the style of two artists and then write about them. So Margaret asked which two artists she was going to write about. And the student said, "You and Picasso." And Margaret thought for a moment and then said, "Oh, why not? At least I'm still here." Well, Peggy passed away last July, aged 105. Since then, 200 illustrations have been donated to the National Library, including many of those you've seen today and many of those you can see over there. These are also in the new book that now celebrates her work, published by HMM in Cardiff. Peggy knew the book was finished, and I promise you, she was making plans to be here. She wanted to meet everybody, talk to everybody. She was going to sit down over there and sign all the books for you. Nothing was going to stop her. And you see, I don't think death has stopped her. I think she's here. She's up there. She's watching everything that's going on, probably disagreeing with some of the things I've been saying. And she's forever speaking to us through her own language of visual storytelling. And if you doubt me, this morning, Valériane and I were sat having breakfast in Medina, talking about illustration, which we do most Fridays, and then we went round the charity shops, and as we came out of Sense, up at the top of the main street, Valériane suddenly pointed at something, and there, in the window, was a plate. This is the one she produced in 2000 for the Glyndŵr exhibition. It was mass-produced, and there are many copies out there. But when you turn over, this says, a proof plate, number 3 out of only 4 produced. 1812-98. Now, if that wasn't Margaret watching us, spending our money in the charity shops, having talked about illustration and planning the talks today, well, what is? Now, I'm just going to thank very quickly all the people who've made this all happen. It was Morvidd who began all this with the talk back in 2019. Nia and Yuan for getting this whole thing on and creating the collaboration with the book. That was thanks to Yuan over there. To Ali and Andy at HMM Publishers, who have seen this book through with a passion. But of course, most of all, to Mark, Malcolm, Gareth, Elaine, Chris, and Peter, her 6 children, most of whom are here today, sitting round here, who I'm sure would love to talk to you afterwards. And I'll just leave you with this last little thought. Leaving her flat a couple of years ago, I turned round to wave goodbye, and she had her hand resting on her face, as she so often did. And she was staring at me, and she said, "Yes, my life really is a fairy tale." Peggy Jones, diolch yn fawr iawn I ti.
What a fantastic tribute to Peggy. Wonderful, wonderful. It just struck me as well when we were hearing about Peggy's contribution, about the contribution as well of many others who've made Wales their home and taken forward Welsh tradition, Welsh literature, Welsh art, the Welsh culture in so many ways. And Lady Charlotte Guest in a strange parallel about the Mabinogion in a way, I suppose. Right, our next speaker is another well-known artist and illustrator who's made a home in Wales since 2007, and she's French and a Quebecer, and grew up in Angers, France. Please welcome Valériane Leblond. Valériane.
Hello. So after Peter, it's going to be difficult to be that interesting, but I'll try my best. So Peter has known Margaret for several years and has been maybe influenced by her work, but I've only came in Wales in 2007, so maybe Margaret hasn't been such an influence on me because I haven't grew up in Wales. But I can relate with her work in a lot of manners. So I'm an illustrator, and first I'm going to show to you how a book is made. So Margaret Jones has gone exactly through the same process as what I'm going to show to you. So what is the work of an illustrator? An illustrator works usually with an author and a text. So that's the first thing that comes before illustration. We get a text. And we work with a publisher and an editor. And all these, the author, the publisher, the editor are really important in the process. It's not like an artist making their work on their own. It's a teamwork. So first of all, there is a text. There is an author that presents the text to a publisher. And then the publisher thinks that this text deserves to be published, and they get an editor on board to work on the text and to commission illustrations to go with the text. So it's a teamwork, and the illustrator comes last of that process, and has to work with the other person. So to show you this process, I'm going to show you that's a book I've illustrated about the life of Aneurin Bevan. It's written by Manon Stefan Ross. I happen to have met Manon Stefan Ross before, but as Peter said, often we don't get to see the author or talk to the author. It's only through the editor that the book is made. So for this book about Aneurin Bevan, I had to do a lot of sketches, of course, on the character, so Aneurin Bevan. And I'm going to show you now for one particular spread. So a spread is, when you open a book, a double page is called a spread. So it's a spread about when Aneurin Bevan is young and getting the miners to fight for their rights. So to illustrate a picture like that, you have to look for images. I think Margaret Jones was often going to the museum, and I'm sure she consulted a lot of history books to know how people would dress or what the castles would look like, everything. Before a picture is even made, there is a lot of work like that. And then there is a storyboard, so that's the first pictures. It's quickly made to send to the editor, so the editor can decide if that works with the text. And then if the storyboard is accepted, we make a pencil drawing. So at this stage, usually the editor can tell to change things because it's easy to change a pencil drawing. And there are things to remember, like to leave some space for the text. So, well, you'll see on the next picture, but you have to remember things like that. And then that's the final picture. So usually the editor doesn't come back and say, no, actually that doesn't work, you have to change it. Usually they respect that it's a lot of work to paint a picture, and they decide on that beforehand. And then it goes through a designer who puts the text at the right place, and it goes to print, and it becomes a book. So it's not like a work of art, a painting on a wall. It's a whole process that depends on several people, and it has to respond, to communicate with the text. It's not just something to look at without, and also it needs, so now I'm going to show you, some pictures by Margaret. So you see here that right in the middle of the picture, you see that there is a little space. That's where the gutter is. So you shouldn't draw anything in the middle, because when you open a book, you can't really see what is right in the middle. So that's why there is a space between the two wolf women. And you see also that there is a white space. That's where the text is supposed to go. Same here, you see that there is the white space where the text goes, that nothing really important happens right in the middle where you close the book. And here, I think that was not a portrait book, that was a landscape book, yeah. So that's one page, and Margaret thought where the text is going to fit, and that's really important to think in advance, because the text has a certain length, and you can't really make the author change the text to fit your picture. It has to. Sometimes it happens, but but yeah, it's thrown upon. And same here. Margaret thought about a way to have the text and the pictures together in that way. And that's another picture, well, two pictures, but there are 3, 4, 5, I'm not sure. And when I was preparing this PowerPoint, my son, who was 10, saw that, and he was amazed that the pencil drawing is not the final artwork, because that's amazing in itself, but it's actually the one on the right, which is the final artwork. And you see there that both pictures are really similar, but one had to fit a portrait format. So Margaret had to change the composition, keep the ideas, but change the composition to fit a book, which is, this one was about an A4 format. So what I'm trying to show there is that there is a lot of planning to make a picture book. It's not an artist waking up in the morning and just drawing and painting for fun. It's for fun, but it has to be consistent, and a lot of work goes through. So have you got the text? No. So there's supposed to be text there which says the threat of AI in illustration. So as as I've shown, you can imagine that it's quite expensive to create a picture book, because, well, there are a lot of people to work on it, and there are deadlines. You have to go to the printer. A lot of different parties are involved. And the publisher, when commissioning a picture book, the publisher thinks about a public, an audience that is going to buy the book. So with a children's book, it has to be good for the children, but it's not usually the children who buy the picture books, it's the parents. So it has to fit the vision of the parents as well. So for the publishers, they can't take many risks because there is a lot of money involved and they don't want to, well, to waste it. And you can understand that from their point of view. So, and so there are, in this world, there are a lot of cutting corners with quality. For example, you can publish a paperback instead of a hardback. And that's one of the anecdotes that I have with Margaret Jones, that Peter showed my Mabinogi book. And the first thing she said was that, oh, it's a hardback. So even if she couldn't see very well, she could see that hardback is nicer than paperback. And in terms of, well, saving money, a lot of books now are printed in China or in, well, overseas because it's cheaper. And that's now another way of maybe saving money would be to suppress the author or the illustrator through AI. So I'm going to show you another book I've illustrated. It's called A Little House in a Big Place. It was commissioned by a publisher in Canada. And when they contacted me, they showed me some pictures they liked by me, and they were very bright, so I thought that's what they wanted. So, so that's inside the book. And I'm going to show you this picture of a kitchen set in the 50s. So I did a lot of research. I used Google Images, but I think Margaret used maybe not Google Images, but something similar to find references to create our own pictures. So yeah, it had to be with like a housewife and a kitchen in the 50s. And I created the picture on the left, and then they told me that it was too bright, the opposite of Margaret's. And so I had to redo it again, but in muted tones. So I thought, well, that was not a waste of time, because I take everything as not entertainment, but a Fordiant training. Yeah, everything is training to get better. So I thought, nowadays with AI, maybe I could have, it could have saved me some time and some paint. So what can I help with? Create image of a kitchen scene set in the 50s with a little girl looking through the window and a mother making a pie at the table, gouache painting style. So, and it gave me that, which I think it's quite good. I think it's quite good, and maybe with this reference I could have created my picture quicker, but it's a bit too bright, so I asked to add a baby, a cat, and muted tones, and it gave me that, which is, it's quite nice, I think, but yeah. So then, warning, now I'm going to ask AI to create a watercolor painting in this style, Margaret Jones, Wales, Tales and Legends, Mythology, Folk. So that's what it created. From far away, it's okay, I think. But if you, yeah. But if you, I don't know what's happening with horse's legs or this. people's faces. But yeah, so I think there is a long way to go before we can replace Margaret Jones. But then I thought maybe that's because I didn't ask AI the right way, and maybe if I ask things the right way, I could get to something better. Because like the pictures I fed AI were very blurry and pixelated, so maybe that's why it didn't work. So so create image of two men riding a giant salmon in a Welsh river in watercolors and muted tones. So that's a bit more, maybe something that is not asked every day. And that's what AI... But, yeah. So I think it's not too bad. It's a bit generic, but I think it's not too bad. But then, so I asked that because at the moment I'm preparing an exhibition and I've made a picture of two men riding a giant salmon, and Margaret has done several. So that's my picture on the left and Margaret's picture on the right. So we see that, well, AI has its vision and we have ours. And what it showed me there is that maybe humans can bring their own voices and stories into a picture, and maybe these pictures can connect with other humans in a way AI can't yet. So I'm going to talk now about what humans, and especially Margaret Jones, bring to picture books. So Margaret Jones is a real person, and to me there is something extraordinary, and you'll see when you go and visit the exhibition there. It's extraordinary contemplating the work of another human being made with hands, eyes, and a brain, just like most of us have. But somehow they managed to create something really special, a unique voice, an individual way of expressing themselves and our world through their eyes. And yeah, I don't think AI can do that. And there is something really unique and irreplaceable for an illustrator, but also for a reader, how our life, our own experiences influence what we create and what we see, and how we respond to art and illustration. So, for example, the books that have been read to us by our parents, the books that we read now, and also the books that we don't read, because AI knows everything, but we don't, and that influences how we do things. And especially when I looked at the pictures there, and you see all the happy accidents with watercolor that has gone maybe not the way Margaret had planned, but she made something really special out of it. So with Margaret, we have someone who's constantly sketching, and yeah, with the amount of work that are in Peter's book, and that's not half of it, according to Peter. And you see all these sketches that she's done on finished paintings, and yeah, she doesn't stop. And these, I don't know if you can see, but they're very botanically correct pictures of holly and oak and willow, hawthorn. And you can see that Margaret has been sitting outside and observing for hours everything. And so there is an experience that is irreplaceable. And also with Margaret living overseas in India and witnessing other people's habit and other culture, and maybe that gave a sense of universalism in her pictures, so they're not restricted to Wales. There is something, worldly about them. And also with Margaret, there is the faith, the vast knowledge of the Bible, how maybe it shapes the interpretation of other fundamental texts, how it shapes interpretations of myths and legends. And so all that makes her a special human being, and she put that in her own paintings. So with Margaret Jones, we have an artist who is also an illustrator, a woman, a mother, an educated person. She has lived overseas, she has a face, and all of these are combined with an extraordinary gift for visual storytelling. So I really like this painting because it's the creation of wedi'i, which is made by Gwydion and Math. So I suppose that Gwydion, you can see, is the magician, so the wizard. And then you see the hands of Math, but they're not very masculine. And the magic wand looks a bit like a paintbrush. And it feels to me that it's a bit like Margaret showing what she can make with a paintbrush there. And how Margaret creates the whole world of the Mabinogi before our very eyes. And it could also be us standing there and taking part. And somehow it's like a ladder taking us where the Welsh kings, where the fairies live, and we become immersed in the Welsh legend. It becomes real thanks to Margaret Jones. So to me, Margaret Jones' illustrations have completely elevated the text, and they stay in our imagination long, long after the book is closed.
Diolch yn fawr iawn I Valériane. Thank you very much, Valériane. That was a fantastic insight into techniques and vision. And I was in Edinburgh at the beginning of the week with representatives of other European national libraries. We were talking, sometimes frightened and sometimes excited about AI, and I never imagined I'd be finishing the week thinking and looking at AI, but that was fascinating. So our last speaker this evening, so it gives me special pleasure to invite Mark Allen Jones to the stage. Mark is the youngest of Margaret's brood, born and bred in Aberystwyth and now lives in Edinburgh. So we should have crossed paths in Edinburgh at the beginning of the week, but there we are. Mark, welcome.
I'm a little bit taller than Valériane, so no offense. Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming today. This is fantastic, isn't it? What a great event you've put on National Library. So, as most of you will know, my mother was English born and bred. But she adopted Wales as her beloved home and gave it her heart fully, along with giving her heart to my father, who was very much Welsh. She was so proud to celebrate the fabulous heritage, cultural heritage we got here, and the natural beauty, of course, which captured her imagination, and which she did so through all of her illustrations of myths and legends. So some of those pictures, as you've already heard, were donated by the family. She passed away last year, and there were a lot of pictures, huge number of pictures in the flat that we just haven't organised. But it was very easy decision on the part of the family to donate as many pictures as possible to the National Library, because that's what she wanted. She really requested in the last few years that as many of the works as possible end up in the National Library as her gift to Wales and as her legacy, in return for Wales welcoming her as an important part of its culture. So it really was important to her. I remember a phone call about 10, 15 years ago where she said that she had recently received a book. I don't know exactly the title. I think it was Eminent British Illustrators. I'm not going to, yeah, don't worry. She complained, she said there wasn't one illustrator from Wales included. No names mentioned, of course. But the story didn't end there. She actually got hold of a phone number, and this is just typical of her, and called the publishers. She got through to an assistant publisher and pointed out that this was an oversight to the person on the phone and needed to be rectified. And the flustered assistant said that she would speak to the publishers and ask them to consider possible inclusions for the next, for future editions. Mum told me that I felt it needed to be pointed out, and it would be a disservice to Wales were it not represented in this book. As I said, no names mentioned. So, the title of my talk is Margaret Jones's life, and of course, a lot of it quite a lot has already been covered, and her biography has already been covered in more detail. She's written an autobiography, and also the wonderful book. I encourage you to look at that. It's absolutely fabulous. It's surpassed all our expectations on the quality and the design. So what I'm going to be presenting today is a brief biography, but with a bit of bias, I guess, on my own first-hand experience, obviously, towards my school years, which actually happened to coincide with when her career was really taking off as an illustrator. So looking back at my mother's life, I guess, like most people, her life can be split into different sections or stages. And I would say, in her case, 5 separate stages of her life that you could define. So I admit, put more bias into the talk in the period that I was around. But more of that later. So the first part I would define of these 5 was the period through childhood from birth in 1918. It's hard to believe that, in England, up until young adulthood. So Margaret Dorothy North, Peggy to her friends, she was born in 1918 in Bromley in Kent, one of 4 children, 3 girls and a boy. And art, as Peter has said, there's going to be a bit of overlap with Peter, I'm sorry, but I mean, that was an overriding passion to her from a very, very young age, and a major part of her life in school. And she already showed talent for it. She said that as a child, her mother died when she was quite young, and she ended up being sent to boarding school. She said that as a child, she would pray for rain at times, just so that she had an excuse to stay indoors and paint and draw. So she was from a reasonably well-to-do family in England, her father being a Methodist minister, and he was later a Hebrew scholar. And as an adult, she gained a degree in classical studies in Birmingham before deciding to train as a missionary at a Methodist college, becoming the only female student there, which she was very proud of. It was there in 1941 that she met and fell in love with my father, who was also attending the same college, and it was apparently love at first sight. My father, Basil, he was from Pendracyber, near Mountain Ash in the Rhondda Valleys, and his father worked as a smithy in the coal mines. So in an area which used to have, may even still do, have the highest level of child poverty in the country. So, I mean, for me, it really is a testament to both of them that despite their very different backgrounds, that they fell in love and ended up living together for 60 years. But after falling in love, their future life together was kind of rudely interrupted by the start of the Second World War. And after they married in 1941, my father went to Mizoram, Ajal province, as you've heard, in the eastern part of India, to work as a missionary with the church, while my mother stayed in Britain and served as a nurse during the second part of the war. So the beginning and the end of the war heralded the second part of my mother's life, and she was able to reunite with my dad in India in 1944, living there for nine years. During this time, they started a family of 3 children, 2 of which are here today, Gareth, Peter and Elaine. So their life in India would have been amazing for somebody in my generation, somebody as young as me, to imagine. No electricity, no TV, no disposable nappies, no dishwashers or washing machines, and the only other foreigners that they were in contact with would have been linked to the church. My father was busy setting up the education system from scratch in that area, and today it's one of the areas in India with the highest literacy as a result, so very proud of that. But during that time, of course, my mum, she didn't have so much time to dedicate to drawing and painting, but did do a few pictures of the locals, and you've seen one of the landscapes. But she found other ways to use her creativity and imagination. So the children were homeschooled, obviously, by my mother, who, no TV in a foreign country, had to also keep them entertained. So she would write plays and perform them, combining their imagination and resourcefulness with education and entertainment, using whatever props they had to hand. And when they came back to Wales in 1954, in Taliesin, they were very well, I don't tell them this, but they were very well educated children with very high levels of reading, fluent in English, fluent in Lushai, which was the Indian language that they spoke before they came back, and about to add Welsh, obviously. And they were then put into the local school in Taliesin, although my mum kept writing plays for the kids to enact and enjoy, you know. So not so much of art at this point in time. So after 3 or 4 years, the family moved to Aberystwyth, and I guess that starts what I would describe as the third stage in my mum's life, where they effectively started a second family, with 3 more children between 1958 and 64, Malcolm, Chris, and last but not least, obviously, myself, the youngest of the 6. Absolutely, absolutely. It was then that everything took off. So my mum was, we have to get these dates in perspective. I know it sounds boring putting a chronology, but she was 45 when I was born, which makes me more than 18 years younger than that guy over there, which is hard to believe, but a big spread in age, I know. So, I mean, the eldest 3 were now going through secondary school, growing slowly into adulthood, and going to university to start further careers. But it's obviously this stage of her life that I quite like to concentrate on, because I can talk about it firsthand. But secondly, it was only really then that her career and that I was witness to, her growing dedication to art, that would develop into, obviously, her becoming a renowned illustrator, which she is now. So you've heard from Peter and Valériane and others, and she's obviously going to be remembered for her artistic talent, her imagination, and incredible intellect. You know, but I would also like, however, to use recollections from my childhood to describe what I think were 3 other notable qualities that my mum had. These are, firstly, determination, although some might call that sheer bloody mindedness at times. Secondly, incredibly high energy levels, just unbelievable. When you see that book and you see the volume, it's just unbelievable how she managed to do all of that. Even later on in life, you know, even well into her 80s, practically into her 90s. And that was combined with a huge, massively positive outlook on life. And finally, for want of a better term, just an insatiable creative force that is inside her. It was almost like she had a massive yearning to just create things. It just had to get out. It was like had a life of its own inside her, this creativity. It wasn't something that she had to work at. You know, and after a few years of raising this second family, at the same time of my father establishing his position as a lecturer in education, we can fast forward to when I was starting primary school in Park Avenue, which is about towards the end of the 1960s. And you've already heard it, but I remember I was only 4 or 5. My mum coming into school one day with a theatre that she'd made out of herself, out of wooden cardboard, painted, complete with a script, soundtrack, glove puppets to look like mice, and then with the teacher's permission, she gave a full performance of Beatrix Potter's Tale of Gloucester to the school children there. So, I mean, nobody had asked her to actually do any of this. She just thought it would be entertaining, and of course it was, you know. But looking back, it seems quite a bold and, you know, quite a strange thing to have done at the time. But it was amazing, obviously, for the kids. And there were many other examples of this. You know, I was in primary school when it moved to Plas Creek after the school was transferred from Park Avenue. And every year, I don't know whether everybody else had it, we used to have these Easter bonnet parades. Remember those? Where people would, on Easter, you'd get a prize if you dressed up in some way. And it would be homemade hats with Easter bunnies decorated. But in her case, not content with a couple of rabbit ears or painted eggshells, my hat, I remember, she made with, it looked like one of those Australian hats with the corks, you know. There were 2 strings hanging down from the hat, and I was supposed to pull these 2 strings, and a door would open in the top of the hat to reveal an Easter chick inside. I mean, fortunately, there's no photo evidence of that. But that was what she was, you know. It had to be sort of completely over the top, really. I mean, as kids, and as we all know, in Wales, it certainly rained a lot, although you wouldn't believe it today. But when it rained, we'd play Subbuteo or board games. My mum, in the meantime, she made a complete game by hand for us. It was Treasure Island. It was a piece of hardboard covered with a black and white checkered board. There were individual small pirate boats that she'd carved out of wood, and they could carry treasure, and there were ports on the side, each one painted for us. You know, and I also remember during this period our house has been particularly noisy, especially during the school holidays when those guys came back. And there would be, you know, huge family debates or arguments, usually about the rules of Monopoly or who won the Battle of Bosworth or something like that. But my mum, usually, she kept very passive in all of these arguments, although she really had a massive, looking back at it, certainly, massive intellect. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of art, literature, history, classics, etc. So over these holidays, she would be preparing dinner for numbers well into double figures, including friends, while at the same time dreaming of Cilwch and Olwyn, King Arthur, Tales of Sinbad, Dragons and Changelings, and secretly planning her next potential art project. You've already heard it, but I remember when I was 7 or 8, I think it was, when she made 40 or 50 dolls in 1 year. And and you've seen the pictures of them. Historical dolls she'd researched. The heads were ping pong balls, which you can see, you know, plastic wood for the noses, the coats embroidered, and the bodies made out of coat hangers that she'd flexed. It's just nuts, really. They were all in Ceredigion Museum. So soon, in the early 1970s, and astonishingly already into her 50s, she started really drawing and painting in earnest. So the first picture you showed was 1968, 1969. So by that point, she's already 51 years old. And initially landscapes. She used to concentrate initially on landscapes, and then obviously increasingly illustrations, and then she started getting commissions. Sometimes she'd just get us ready for school, and then when we were gone, she would be dropped off by my dad because she didn't drive, usually somewhere up the Rydal Valley, and with paper taped onto a board, a few HB pencils, and she'd spend the day drawing. She had some homemade sandwiches for lunch and a few curious cows for company, and that was about it, you know. And at that time, she was honing her craft, so she'd come back, then she'd have the drawing, then she'd meticulously copy this incredibly detailed drawing onto tracing paper. In the meantime, there'd be a full-size piece of paper or two chucked in a bath for water, so it was stretched and then stuck onto the hardboard, and then she'd copy the tracing on. But early on, because watercolor is a very unforgiving medium, she didn't always get the wash right, and sometimes it just would run or something, so she'd have to redo 2 or 3 times that same picture, you know, in order just to get the background perfectly right. And the colors at that time, especially in the early pictures, you've already seen the evolution from muted colors to bright colors. Well, yeah, they kind of dull reflecting the Welsh weather, to be honest, and Prussian blue, yellow ochre, and vermilion were what she used. And but then once she'd completed the whole thing, she had a frame that she'd bought. She'd take that home with her, and she'd saw it. You know, saw the angle, 45 degrees, tack them together, paint them in white paint, and then stick them on the picture, along with the mount. So that was all done. You know, her love of art and life was so big, she just had insatiable energy to spend on that growing career. You know, and success, obviously, as you've heard, really came after she made exhibitions of her work in the church and the arts centre, and commissions leading into for the Mabinogi, and start of realising what was her dream, which was to become an illustrator a la Arthur Ransom, you know. And in those exhibitions, she sold all of the pictures very easily, although in truth it didn't make her much money, because for all her huge talent as an artist, she was an absolutely useless businesswoman. And she never had contracts for much of the work she did, and quite honestly, she did get ripped off a few times. And early on was selling pictures for next to nothing, often by word of mouth. But she didn't really mind. She didn't want those dirty commercial considerations to get in the way of her creative flow. And, you know, as much to our irritation, to be honest, but as my brother Gareth commented to her much later, he said, you did it all for Wales, Mum, you know, you're not for yourself. So we as kids, we took pretty well all of this incredible juggling act between domestic and artistic life pretty much for granted, I'm ashamed to say, you know. At age 7 or 8, I was personally more concerned about what was going to be put on for dinner, and whether or not I'd end up playing centre forward for Chelsea or outside half for Wales, or both, you know. And I remember, you've seen a couple of pictures of me sitting, posing for her, and I looked pretty miserable because all I really wanted to do was go outside and play football, you know. But I do remember, as her reputation, you'll remember this, as her reputation grew nationally, one time the Welsh Current Affairs programme, Heddiw, came to do a small slot on her, just to show just how extraordinary she really was, being able to juggle home life and her career. And they chose to film us at tea time in the house so that they could show just this, and how she was able to continue her domestic chores while painting these amazing pictures. So they had a cameraman set up in the breakfast room, well, it was, yeah, next to the Arga, behind that, on a little ladder behind us, and there was a film as we kids, the three of us, had to eat, while we suppressed a completely massive fit of giggles. And my mum, she was horrified when it was aired on TV, and the presenter described how she was serving breakfast to the children in between painting jobs. She was horrified because we had been filmed eating tea, cake and jam sandwiches at that point, so. And he described it as breakfast. But remember, you know, as we were growing up and becoming more independent, she was able to add more art into the art domestic life balance. And later, as I was reaching adulthood, now the last of her children is still at home, because by this time we'd moved her to Cafodd, where she was able to focus more on art. My dad on retirement, he was fishing and gardening. And really, the illustrator of a sextagenarian was now getting into full swing. However, she wouldn't only, as you've seen, she wouldn't only draw and paint for commissions, but much of the time for her enjoyment. Calendars, months of the year, the seasons, paintings made up of drawings and plants that she'd picked up from walks around the lanes in Cafodd. And she wrote her own poems for each of the month pictures, and she was able to recite them from memory even well into her hundreds. You know, she made many friends. She played a huge part in the local village life in Cafodd, and a tapestry made from the WI Institute there, based on her pictures, it still hangs there. When I started my own family, some years later, I had two boys. While they were still very young, my parents came down to stay with us, and she brought with her a huge number of teaching cards that she had made with words and pictures, each beautifully painted, to use for teaching our eldest to read and write. We hadn't asked for them. It was just a part of life for her, and she gave my eldest son a painting which she had made with his letters. His name's Sam, so S-A-M, in 3 panels. I think it's in the book, filled with objects starting with those letters. I mean, she really loved combining art with education. So I've really gone beyond the 3rd stage of her life into the 4th, which a lot of which you've already heard about from Peter, which is her purple patch of art, amazingly, from her late 50s until 80s. So you'll know a lot about the prolific volume of work, 25 to 30 books or more. And I think that book of Revelations, personally, I think it's remarkable, not only because I think it's some of the best quality of illustrations, but also because she wrote the entire text by hand in her own calligraphy, you know. So, and with international and national recognition, she didn't become arrogant or above people, but was only she was always respectful and non-judgmental and really welcoming to anybody who wanted to talk to her. She wrote her own books, as you've seen. You've already heard this story, but she illustrated the Nat series. She told me that writing was was very easy because she already had the entire stories in her head, and it was just a case of getting it out on the page. She didn't have to sort of work or writer's cramp or any of that. It was already there. And they were particularly popular with Prendergast School in Haverfordwest. And you've already heard the story, so you've stolen that, of a boy saying that his study was two famous artists, Pablo Picasso and my mum. And I think it was after that she gave up all her entire publishing rights to Prendergast. I mean, her fifth and final stage in her life, I would define as after her painting days. And it really wasn't until macular degeneration of her eyes started to get the better of her eyesight. And when my father passed away, which was that she was really forced to slow down and call time on her career well into her 80s, 90s. You know, at this time she moved from Capelbanga into the flat in Aberystwyth, in the old Arthwin school. And she lived with my brother Pete. And then after he sadly passed on, she lived the final years on her own with both professional and family care support. Her strong faith in God and her great friendships built in the church really helped sustain her, especially at this time. And even with her eyesight all but gone, she really tried to maintain a positive outlook, and she loved nothing more than a good old argument in the Bible classes in Bath Street. I mean, her knowledge of the Bible, as well as classics and the arts, remained sharp as a tack. She fought off dementia as long as possible, starting to succumb in the last year of her life, really. But she was still doing the Guardian cryptic crossword daily, with Peter, or later another one of us, reading the clues, while she fought for every answer, paying in blood, sweat, and tears. It was painful, but she'd get there. So, I mean, it was her huge determination and stubbornness, really, that helped us to survive until nearly 106 years old. So, determination, positive energy, creative force, she really had all three in spades, I think, you know. So, once again, thanks to Nia and thanks to Morfydd and everybody at the National Library. I think it's a beautiful event, and like you say, if she is looking at us, she's got a huge smile on her face, although she wouldn't admit it. Thanks to Valériane. I think that was a great talk, and I personally hope and believe that right now AI can't. It's hard to believe that computers could ever replace this sort of imagination and creativity that's created these amazing pictures around us. And obviously, Peter Stevenson, we must give special mention to you. You know, you really felt that my mum's work deserved showing to a wider audience. And the book is not just a celebration of her life, but it can also hopefully provide some kind of a reference and inspiration for other illustrators as well as all of us. It's a really beautiful book, and Peter and the designers and the publishers have really worked hard with, let's be honest, in this day and age, little or no financial gain. So it's just amazing. I think your efforts are just massively appreciated by all of the family, and they were so by my mum, and we really can't thank you enough. Just one last request for everybody, for all of you, and thank you all again for all coming today. It's really wonderful to see the support. You've already heard one story. I think it was briefly on one of the slides, Peter, that a few years ago, through S4C, my mum told me that she'd heard from there that there was a man in South Wales, we don't know where, possibly Swansea, that liked a Mabinogi poster so much that he had a tattoo of it covering a large part of his back. But we've not seen any photographic evidence, so we don't know this is urban legend or truth. And so I guess a request that I would leave all of you is that if anybody sees or hears any of it, please ask him to get in contact with us, because we'd really love to see it. And maybe it can go in the future edition of the book. You know, the final pencil and then the tattoo. Okay, thanks very much.
Well, I've got a surprise for you, Mark. No, don't worry, folks, that's not happening. I have to get the microphone down a little. What a beautiful tribute to a remarkable lady who did so much for Wales. You know, she was a creative force, and you know, we're so lucky to have had her. So thank you, and to the family, thank you. And for your very generous donations as well. We're really grateful for that. Diolch I bawb am ddod heno, diolch i'r tîm am y gwaith o drefnu. Thank you to my colleagues, and thank you everybody for coming tonight. We've still got a little bit of time to enjoy the display here, to spend some money in the shop as well, and also to run down the beach in your trunks because it's still a beautiful evening. So thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Nos da.